Everyone from the chat stream or the live stream this morning. I had to cut out a little bit early to get to an interview, so I wasn't able to answer all the super chats. That's what I'm doing right now. I want to pick up right where I left off with Jose Aguilera. Jose, thank you for the super chat. What are your views on the GLD ETF with current gold situation? It depends on why you're buying the GLD. If you're buying it just to have exposure to gold, I much prefer the physical metal, especially if it's part of the insurance side of your portfolio. If it's part of the speculative side of your portfolio, or if you're kind of just trading it, I think GLD has benefits from the standpoint of liquidity, but you're taking a little bit of risk because your counterparty is going to be HSBC. So some people, that's no big deal. For other people, they don't want to do business with HSBC because they're the custodian of the gold. They don't want to do business with them at all. So if you're one of those people, then I would suggest the Sprott product, the competitor product, which is PHYS, but you're not going to have as much liquidity. So it really depends on why you're buying it. But my main point is if you're buying just to have exposure to gold for the insurance side of your portfolio, you always want to just have the precious metal, or at least I always want to have the precious metal, the physical for that. Freedom is my religion. Thank you for the super chat. How safe are gold vaults? Bullion Star, Singapore, in Switzerland. I think history shows they're pretty darn safe. When you've got one of the private gold vault storage facilities. But you've got to do your own homework, and depending on how much gold you have, I would suggest diversifying it so you don't have all your risk in one facility. Depending on how much gold you have, though, I just prefer keeping it buried in your backyard. That's what I mean. If I've got 100 grand, I forgot who it was, but someone was saying that they like to have all their physical gold within a quick bike ride of where they live. Because if you think about why you would need physical gold, other than just to maintain your purchasing power, if it hits the fan, do you want your gold in some country that's 5,000 miles away? I mean, probably what I'd do, obviously there's a threshold. If you had $10 million in gold, you probably don't want it buried in your backyard. But I'd take a certain portion of that and just keep it close, however you want to do that. And then obviously that number is different for everybody. Some, maybe it's 10,000, maybe it's 100,000. And then everything above and beyond that, I'd put into storage facilities, but then diversify it. Excuse me. Okay, the Luco Show. Thank you for the super chat. Thanks for your wisdom, GG. Every day's a school day. Okay, I appreciate you taking the time to watch, Luco. Musab Chaudhry. Hopefully I'm getting that right, Musab. Thanks, George. What's your take on Exxon Shell after the earnings? I want them to go lower. I own Shell, but I want it to go just... I don't think it's going to go bankrupt. I'm not too worried about that. But the lower it goes, the better. Because I can just buy. So what I do is I bought... in the middle of March, I can't remember the price. It was somewhere in the mid-20s. And although it got down to 19, I just bought it because it was cheap. I'm paying a ridiculous dividend, which I thought would be cut. But again, if I'm holding it 20 years, I don't really care about the dividend for the next year or two. They've got a huge track record, an amazing track record of paying their dividends. So I'm assuming that when they start becoming more profitable again, they're going to go right back to paying that dividend. Maybe I'm wrong. But if they got cheaper, I'd love to buy more. So I know that Shell scratched their dividend, which made their stock tank. I was happy to see that. So I think that's the best way I can answer your question. Is my main take is I hope they're going lower, because then I can buy more. Question asker, thank you for the super chat. Best course of action for 401k and cash savings. I don't know the specifics of your 401k. And I don't know if you can short stocks. I don't know if you can buy real estate with that or physical gold. I'm assuming you can't, or maybe you have to buy an ETF. So if it were me and I couldn't buy physical gold, I'd try to break up your portfolio in the same way. So 10% insurance, 80% it's got to pay you to own it, 10% speculation. For the physical side, I'd buy probably Sprott. I'd do the PHYS because, number one, I trust Rick. And number two, when I did the research, I know their custodian is the Canadian Mint, which I have a lot more confidence in them as a counterparty compared to HSBC. And I could be, that's just the way I look at it. It helps me sleep well. I could be crazy. I could be wearing a tinfoil hat on that. Fine. Just helps me sleep a little bit better at night. And that's if I couldn't do the physical for the 10% of my portfolio that I had allocated to insurance. As far as your cash, I just like it in very short-term T-bills, depending on how much you have. If you have over 250 or under 250, it's probably okay in the bank, because although I'm not a big fan of the FDIC and they don't have even close to enough money to handle all the deposits in the United States. They're wildly underfunded, but of course, the government's most likely going to bail them out. It's kind of what they did back in the savings and loan crisis. So, but if it's over 250, I just like T-bills. And to be clear, a lot of people say, George, you're so down on you see inflation and you're so down on the deficits and the government, and why would you ever extend credit to them? I'm not talking about doing it for 10 years. I'm talking about 2 months or 3 months, something like that, where you don't have a lot of inflation risk. But if I've got $10 million, I'd way rather be in 3-month treasuries, just rolling it over, than have that $10 million in a checking account to where my counterparty's the bank. It's just me. Hector, thank you for the super chat. Is it a bad move if my wife and I purchase our first home, $550K in LA at this time? Should we hold off for another year? 7% down, solid income. I'm assuming you're getting a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, Hector. It's so hard for me to give you a specific response, Hector, because I don't know your personal situation. I don't know your wife. Maybe your wife is adamant about buying a home and starting a family. There's so many different things at play. It's just, I understand this decision isn't strictly financial. If I'm going to answer your question from a strictly financial standpoint, what would I do? I would wait. You're in a cyclical market. You've got, in fact, I just talked about this with Jason Hartman this morning about LA and California. There's a lot of jumbo loans there, and the banks right now are frowning upon jumbo loans. They're not giving them out like they typically do. And if a large percentage of the debt in the housing market in your local area is reliant upon jumbo loans and there's not access to the debt anymore, that could be problematic. And your RV ratios there, I know, are going to be brutal. For a $550,000 house, my guess is you're probably only getting maybe $2,000, $2,500 a month in rent. So, unless you just found a smoking deal. Now, Hector, if you found a house, if you found a super motivated seller who, for whatever reason, was giving you a price comparable to 2012, when things were down at their historic trend line on a national level, then maybe I'd pull the trigger. But if it's just 550 just straight off the MLS, like those are all the comps, I'd probably hold off. I'd rent for another year and just see where the market went. Steven, thank you for the super chat. George, just listened to the Macro Voices interview with Lacey Hunt. Yes, awesome. He kept making a distinction between the Fed buying assets and spending money. Yes, this is a good question, Steven. What's the difference? Fantastic question. When, and I haven't interviewed Dr. Hunt, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but when I listened to that, what I assume he was referencing, when the Fed is buying assets, they're usually buying treasuries from primary dealer banks. These primary dealer banks have accounts at the Federal Reserve. Just think of it as their checking account. So if the Federal Reserve purchases an asset from a primary dealer bank or any of the banks under the Fed's umbrella that have accounts with the Fed, they are simply printing, if you will, bank reserves. Those aren't necessarily dollars. So, and I remember in this interview, Dr. Hunt spoke specifically about the catalyst to whether he would change his mind going from a deflationary opinion to a hyperinflationary opinion was if the Fed, quote unquote, prints money. He's using that term a lot different than I think you're using that term. Dr. Hunt is using money printing as a way to describe the Fed creating more deposits in the retail banking system or creating more dollars in the way you look at dollars. In other words, they're creating dollars outside of the financial system. They're not creating bank reserves. See? So, well, they're creating bank reserves and deposits. So, as an example, if the Federal Reserve buys treasuries from you, then they're creating additional deposits in your account. Let's say you've got $10,000 in your account. They buy $100,000 of treasuries from you. Well, then your account, your checking account, would go up to $110,000. They've printed money. They've printed actual money that's in the real economy that you can take and spend on a new car or a down payment on a house. You can actually, the real individuals and entities in the real economy can actually spend that money, get it into circulation. That's what Dr. Hunt is referring to when he talks about money printing. Where when you think of money printing, you'll probably think of the Fed just running up their balance sheet to 7 trillion, 10 trillion, whatever. And the way money printing is used so generically, I mean, you're both right, but he's trying to get down to the specifics and figure out, is the Fed just creating more currency units as bank reserves just to buy assets from Goldman Sachs, where those bank reserves don't really get out into the system? Because let's just say Goldman Sachs took those bank reserves that the Fed just printed up out of nowhere and purchased stocks with them from another primary dealer bank. What have they done? It's just all that Goldman Sachs does is take their bank reserves from their account at the Fed and they move those bank reserves to whatever bank that they buy assets from. So the bank reserves never leave the Fed. It's just like these bank reserves that the Fed has tucked under their mattress. And Goldman Sachs has a portion of their mattress. JP Morgan has another portion. So if Goldman Sachs buys something from JP Morgan, although the assets trade hands, they move from one balance sheet to the other, the reserves just go from Goldman Sachs' side of the Fed's mattress over to JP Morgan's side of the Fed's mattress, but the money's still in the Fed's mattress. That's the key. So when Dr. Hunt talks about the Fed printing money or spending money, he's talking about the Fed taking money and printing money to spend in the real economy and not just tuck away under their mattress. That's the key. And you have to ask yourself, is the Fed creating funny money to buy assets from a non-financial institution or a financial institution? And if the answer is a non-financial institution, like an individual, like doing MMT, helicopter money, UBI, something like that, then using Dr. Hunt's definition, that would be spending money or printing money. If the Fed is just creating bank reserves just to buy treasuries from Goldman Sachs, Dr. Hunt refers to that as just buying assets or creating bank reserves. He doesn't refer to that as printing money or spending money. See, and I know I was redundant there, but I think it gets complex, but it's just crucial that all of us understand the distinction and how economists and hedge fund managers or how these pros use the terminology sometimes a little bit too generally, because they just assume that you know what they're talking about based on the context of the conversation. DL, thank you for the super chat. George, would you consider a purchase of GDX an investment or a speculation? The main reason to buy would be the asset appreciation. It doesn't pay a dividend. Speculation. Easy question. Speculation. Any of the gold miners or an ETF that tracked the miners, to me, would be a speculation because it does not pay me to own it, and it would not be insurance because it's not physical gold. Jonathan, thank you for the super chats. I am all in Bitcoin. Wish me luck. I wish you luck, Jonathan. I hope you do well, but I wouldn't be all in on any asset class. But I hope you do well. Anne, thank you for the super chat. Hello from Sweden, she says. Hello, Anne. Thank you for tuning in. Your videos are great. Is this the time to buy real estate? European markets. Will the correct global virus impact prices up or down? I don't see them impacting them. I don't see them being a tailwind. That's for sure, especially in European markets where interest rates have been so low, and I would assume your real estate prices, if you go back and look at the past 100 years in Sweden, adjusted for inflation, I would assume your real estate prices are extremely high. And remember, we're trying to buy things when they're cheap and sell them when they're expensive. So I don't know the Swedish market, but I would assume that it's closer to the expensive side, historically speaking, than the cheap side. So I wouldn't say now is the time to buy. But, of course, everything is a function of price. So if you can get a fantastic price on an apartment or a property, then yeah, go ahead and pull the trigger. So what is a good price? Well, it goes back to a chart of Swedish home prices or property prices going back as far as you can go. Let's say 100 years, adjusted for inflation. And is the price you're paying for the asset, is it high on that chart, or is it low? And I just use the example of the United States housing market. Right now, prices are very high. But if you could buy an asset just because you had a motivated seller, if you could buy based on the comps in 2012 and not 2020, then you got to pull the trigger. That's a fantastic opportunity. So you've got to differentiate it between the macro question and then the individual property question. Most of the time, they're the same, but sometimes they're quite different based on the seller, and because the real estate markets are so inefficient, much more inefficient than a currency market, bond market, or a stock market, and you use those inefficiencies to your advantage. Baxter, thank you for the super chat. Love you, George. It's unreal how good you are with producing content. Any way one can support you more, keep it up. Well, I appreciate the kind words, Baxter. It's humbling. It's an honor to be able to produce content and just have people that, for whatever reason, like to hear what's going through my mind. And I always kind of throw it back on the viewers, and I appreciate their time, or the time they take to watch the videos, just as much, if not more, than you guys appreciate me taking the time to produce the videos. It's I understand your time is valuable. Everyone has a family. I mean, you're watching a 20-minute video on George Gammon explaining the swap markets. I mean, that's time you could be spending with your kids, at the gym, with your wife, with your husband. So I don't take the responsibility lightly, and I appreciate you guys enjoying the videos enough to not only take time to watch them, but take time to comment and come on a live stream like this. It's a very big deal. And I'm speaking not only for myself, but for Sebastian and the editors and everyone on the team, that we appreciate you guys just as much, if not more, than you guys appreciate what we do on our end. So as long as you guys continue to watch and continue to enjoy, we'll continue to produce videos. We might change it up a bit. Who knows? Maybe we find a type of video you guys like a little bit better, and then we'll go that direction. But we have no plans of stopping. We're really having fun. Chris, thank you for the super chat. Can you discuss risk associated with expat living in a country pegged to dollars? I don't know if there's additional risks as an expat. There's just overall risk in the sense that you're going to have to adopt, or the country is most likely going to have the same type of interest rates as the United States, or the issuer of the currency that they're pegged to. And that could be good, it could be bad. If the economic tides in both countries are similar, then it's no big deal. But if you have one going up and the other going down, and the one going down is the U.S., and they peg it at, let's say, 0% interest rates, then that could lead to some serious asset bubbles. As far as, but I don't know that would really affect you as an expat. I would actually kind of look at the question a little bit different, Chris. I would say, I don't know why you'd want to be an expat living in a country pegged to dollars. Maybe you have to be there for a job or something like that. I would prefer to be in a country that was not pegged to the dollar, to where I could increase my standard of living based on the dollar relative to the local currency. So pesos, as an example, the peso's gone from, call it 3,000 to 4,000 over the last 6 months. Well, that has been a windfall to my purchasing power here in Colombia with the cash flow I have denominated in US dollars. And if it goes against you, well, then you most likely have peso assets that you're able to cash out, turn them back into dollars, and increase your purchasing power then. Or if you're like me and you kind of like being nimble as far as where you spend your time, if the dollar goes down, then you can just go to a country that uses dollars and takes it to where your expenses are now denominated in the US dollar, but then you take and spend your cash flow that you have coming in from the countries whose currencies have appreciated against the dollar. It's kind of like this constant arbitrage type of, like a living arbitrage, a geo arbitrage, like my buddy Jason Hartman says. But that's how I'd look at it. I'd look at it more just macro. I don't think there's any advantage or disadvantages of being an expat in particular. But if I was an expat and I had the flexibility, I'd try to maybe consider a country that that wasn't pegged to the dollar to increase my purchasing power, especially if I'm a retiree right now, a baby boomer, and I'm on a fixed income like Social Security. I would for sure want to go to a country like Colombia. HP Pilot, thank you for the super chat. I heard you say multiple times that gold is cheap. How do you establish its fair value? Any data or indicators you use? Well, I just look at gold going back as far as I can, adjusted for inflation. And on that basis, it's not super cheap. It's nowhere near as cheap as it was like at the end of the late 90s. I think it was really down then. But you have to start there. But then you have to also look at the money supply. And if you look at M2 and if you look at the price of gold, then it's cheap. It's cheap. But I want to be clear. Even if it's not cheap, I'd still buy it, because that gold to me it serves a different purpose. It's insurance. So if I buy a Ferrari, I'm not going to ask myself, well, is insurance cheap or is it expensive? Well, maybe I will before I buy the Ferrari. But I'm just buying insurance. Like, as soon as I buy the Ferrari, I'm buying insurance. It's the same thing. I look at gold the same way. So as soon as I get an extra, call it 100 grand, I'm not asking myself what's the cost to insure the 90,000. I'm just asking myself, I just know I need to insure the 90,000 or the 100,000 in total. So I'm going to take 10,000 and buy gold with it, regardless of the price. Just because I don't look at gold in that way. Now, if you're buying gold strictly as a speculation, then it's a completely different story, because then your main question needs to be, is it cheap or is it expensive? Abby, thank you for the super chat. Buffett never bet against the American people. Real life. What happens when the smartest Americans stop having kids? I would take it a step further, Abby, and say what happens when the smartest Americans, and I'm not going to say the smartest Americans, but what happens when the Americans who produce the most not just stop having kids, but maybe they just leave. When I first moved to Puerto Rico in whatever it was, 2012, 2013, when they set up Act 2022, back then it was kind of a very small community. Now you got Schiff and Maloney and Dent and all these people live down there now. But when I first went there, it was just a very small group of people to the extent where like one of the things you had to do to get your residency down there was to get a driver's license. Well, the local DMV in San Juan, I mean, oh my gosh, it's a nightmare. It takes you 6 hours of sitting there waiting in line. It's like worse than the US DMV, if you can even imagine that. So a lot of the people that I saw at the DMV when I was going through this process were gringos, and they were there for the same reason. And you kind of, when you registered to vote, you'd see the gringos that were there for the same reason. When you got your driver's license, you were there for 6 hours with the gringos, there for the same reason. So you get to talking to these people, and listen, these people are the people you want in the United States. They are the producers. They are the people who create jobs. They're not the trust fund babies, let's call them. They're not the people who are making money due to having political connections or crony capitalism. These are the people that started with nothing, zero, very similar to myself, and built up big businesses and create a lot of jobs. They were obviously moving out of the United States, moving to Puerto Rico. I see it the same thing here in Colombia. The guys I hang out with here in Colombia, they're these producer types of people, and they're leaving the United States. So, and of course, they're not leaving in droves, and a lot of people are just kind of moving from these high tax states to states like Florida and Texas. But the worse things get, the more draconian, and the more we vilify the people who produce and increase their taxes, they're just going to leave. They're going to leave at a certain point. So that I would be more concerned with this. I don't want to call them the smartest, because often the people who produce a lot and create a lot of jobs, they aren't necessarily the smartest people. And look at me as an example. I'm by no means the sharpest tool in the shed, but I've created a ton of jobs because I've got those skills. I've got that ambition. I've got the skill set. So I guess that's the best way I'd answer the question. Jan, thank you for the super chat. If I were to sell a home worth $170K and settle in AGEs, is the tax on the 170, or is it on the face value of the coins? Is there a legal tender? I don't know, Jan. I don't know. That's a question for like Schiff or Rick. I don't know the intricacies of gold coins and how they're treated from a tax standpoint at all. So I appreciate your super chat, but I'm going to have to punt on that one because I don't want to give you any bad information. I would look on, I'd Google it and try to find some resources that I personally trust, which would be Schiff and Rick Rule. Rick Rule's with Sprott. Okay, Dapper Dave, going back to his super chat. And that was a good one, Dave. And it says, and I actually did a little bit of homework here prior to coming on to this super chat cleanup session, if you want to call it that. So I think I've got a decent answer for you. He says, can you let George know that when he does the video, I'm thinking along the lines of annuities. Not sure if it would affect car insurance, although the concept might be the same. Okay, so Dave, and if any of you watched the normal live stream, if you haven't, I'd suggest, because Dave had a fantastic question. He heard Buffett talk about Berkshire having to pay out money if we have negative interest rates. So I did a quick Google search, Dave, and I think what he was referring to is when you pay an insurance company, they take your premiums and they invest them. A lot of times they hold a significant portion in cash. And the way Buffett's been able to make so much money is people give him all these premiums and he can invest them at a much higher rate, and he can pocket the spread. So, but by law, the insurance company isn't going to have 100% of those premiums that they haven't paid out yet, or they haven't paid back to the individual the individual policy holder. They're going to have, let's just say, 50% in cash. Well, if they have 50% in cash and they're being charged a negative interest rate, how does that work? Because they need the cash, 100% of that 50%, in order to pay insurance holders or policy holders if they get into a car accident, or if you have an annuity where they're having to pay you back. And the way that they're able to pay you on the annuity is they take the money and invest it. Let's say they've got $10 billion. They take the $10 billion from all the people that have paid into the annuity. They're investing that at a specific rate of return. They're giving you what the profit is, and they're pocketing a little fee, or probably a large fee. So if they're not able to make money on the investment, how do you get your annuity back? If they have to pay money to hold a portion of those premiums in cash, how are they able to afford to pay the policyholder when they need their money due to a car accident, or their home burns down, or through an annuity payment? See, this is what I think Buffett was talking about. It's the fact that he or XYZ insurance company or annuity company is going to be charged for the cash that they're holding. That's, I think, his main point. Okay, cool. I think that's it, guys. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate the flexibility. I had to leave the earlier live stream. I had to leave it a little earlier than we typically do to get to an interview. So hopefully you're able to hopefully you're able to watch this portion to find the question, the answer to your question, and look forward to seeing you guys on the next live stream every single Sunday, noon Eastern time. And I will see you on the next video.